The moment she walked through that door and the entire room went quiet, not the kind of quiet that welcomes someone, but the kind that has already decided something about them. I put down my drink, pushed back my chair and stood up. Not theatrically. Not to make a point. I stood up the way you stand when something is being done wrong directly in front of you and you appear to be the only person in the room who has noticed it happening. The table had 20 people at it. Not one other person moved. She was standing in the doorway in a pale yellow dress, small pearl buttons down the front, a soft collar, the kind of dress that belonged somewhere gentler than this restaurant, somewhere with afternoon light and garden chairs and people who weren't already 3 glasses into a birthday dinner and looking for entertainment. She stood there for exactly 3 seconds. I counted later, going back over it. 3 seconds in a doorway while 20 people looked at each other instead of at her, while the particular laughter of people who are in on a joke settled around the table like sediment. And then she made a decision. I could see it happen. Not in a dramatic way, no squaring of shoulders, no lifted chin, no performance of courage. Just a small, private recalibration. A woman who had assessed a room and found it wanting and decided to walk in anyway. She walked in. Found the empty seat beside mine. Sat down. Looked at my place card. Looked at me. Said very quietly, "Fair warning. I have no idea why I'm here." I said, "Neither do I. Drink?" She looked at the wine. She looked at me. Something moved behind her eyes, a small, quick calculation I didn't yet know how to read. "Yes," she said. "Please." I poured. That was the first minute. The whole rest of everything was already inside that minute, compressed and waiting. I just didn't know it yet. Before I go any further, if you're listening to this right now, drop a comment and tell me where in the world you're watching from. These stories have been traveling further than I ever expected, and I genuinely want to know where they're landing. All right, back to it. My name is Joel Adora, 34 years old. I work as a structural surveyor for a mid-sized civil engineering firm, which means I spend the majority of my working life inside buildings that are quietly failing, assessing subsidence in Victorian foundations, mapping damp through 100-year-old brickwork, writing careful reports about why things are going to fall down, and then watching developers ignore the reports until something dramatic happens. It is, in every conceivable way, as glamorous as it sounds. I live on the 3rd floor of a converted Victorian terrace on Marsden Road. The neighborhood used to be rough and is now aggressively pretending not to remember that. I have a decent coffee machine, a record collection my upstairs neighbor has described as a cry for help, and a leak under my bathroom sink that I've been meaning to fix since approximately February. It is, by any reasonable measure, a small and ordered life. 4 years ago, the relationship I'd been in for 6 years ended. Not with drama, we weren't dramatic people. It ended the way certain buildings fail. Not all at once, but through a slow accumulation of small structural compromises that nobody addresses until the whole thing is unsalvageable. She wasn't wrong. I wasn't wrong. We'd just grown into the wrong shape for each other, and the realizing of it happened so gradually that by the time it was over, most of the grief had already been done quietly in installments over the preceding 18 months. She met someone at work. I don't blame her. I don't blame myself. I understood the geometry of it. Not broken, just recalibrated. Not bitter, just careful now. What I built afterward wasn't a wall. It was more like a preference. A preference for my own company, for the specific piece of a man who has learned to be comfortable in a quiet flat on a Tuesday evening with a whiskey and a book and nobody requiring anything of him. I kept a small circle, my oldest friend Jeff, a couple of colleagues I'd eat lunch with, and my downstairs neighbor, an older woman named Gail who left shortbread outside my door in winter and had once told me I looked like someone who needed considerably more natural light. She wasn't wrong, but I appreciated the shortbread. The life I'd built fit. Snug. Maybe a little too snug. But that is a specific kind of problem that doesn't announce itself loudly. It announces itself quietly on a Tuesday in October, in the form of a pale yellow dress in a restaurant doorway while 20 people look the wrong direction. Jeff Callum throws himself a birthday dinner every year at the same Italian restaurant on Hartley Street. He has done this for 9 years without apology or modification. The restaurant has a back room with low ceilings and exposed brick that traps warmth in a way that's pleasant for the first 20 minutes and then becomes a commitment. This year someone had arranged rosemary sprigs and white tea lights in low vases along the center of 2 pushed-together tables, and the burlo was open when I arrived, and the room had the particular energy of people who have been drinking for 40 minutes and are currently at their most charming, before the evening tips into anything regrettable. I arrived early as I always do. I would rather stand at a bar for 10 minutes than walk into a room already in full motion. I found my place card near the middle of the table. The seat beside mine was empty, its name card face down. I didn't think about it. I ordered a whiskey and made adequate conversation and watched the room fill. She arrived at 7:42. I know because I'd checked my watch 90 seconds before, calculating whether the evening would run past 10. The door from the corridor opened, and she was just there. The room did that thing rooms do when something unexpected arrives. A ripple of attention quickly reassembled into the performance of not paying attention. I caught 3 pairs of eyes exchanging something across the table. I caught Jeff at the head of it doing the particular smile he wears when he thinks he's being subtle. He is constitutionally incapable of being subtle. She stood in the doorway. This is the part one returned to. She didn't scan the room for a rescue. She didn't look for a friendly face or a sign that she was welcome. She assessed the whole of it, 20 people, the judgment already assembled, the faint amusement already in the air, and then she made a private decision and walked in. Not with performance. Not with defiance. She simply decided to keep going, the way you keep going through things that are unpleasant when stopping would be worse. That's a different thing from bravery and I think considerably harder. She walked to the empty seat beside mine and sat down. The name card in front of her said, Ren. 1 syllable. It suited her in a way I couldn't have articulated at the time, but that feels obvious now. She was wearing the yellow dress with the pearl buttons. It had a soft collar and sat easily on her, the way clothes sit on people who aren't thinking about them. Her hair was dark and pinned up loosely, the kind of arrangement that looks unconsidered and isn't. She had a quality of stillness about her, even moving, even walking into a room full of people who were using her as ambient entertainment. A stillness that was not passivity but something more like precision. She moved only when she meant to. Her eyes, when they finally came to mine, were gray-brown. Pewter in October light. River water in the last week before winter closes it over. Not the kind of eyes you'd describe as beautiful in the generic sense. The kind you'd describe if you were trying to be accurate. She had a habit I noticed almost immediately. When she was thinking, she touched the third button of her collar. Not anxiously, analytically, the way you touch a compass before committing to a direction. She looked at my place card. She looked at me. And she said very quietly, "Fair warning. I have no idea why I'm here." I said, "Neither do I drink?" She looked at the wine. She looked at me. Something in her expression shifted. A small calculation completed quickly. "Yes," she said. "Please." I poured. She took the glass. She looked at the table rather than the room, and something in the set of her shoulders released very slightly, by about 1 degree, the way a held thing releases when it finds a surface it can rest against. The dinner began. And I found, over the following 20 minutes, that I had no interest whatsoever in any other conversation at the table. Jeff made his announcement 20 minutes into the main course, which was either brave or catastrophically ill-judged depending on where you were sitting. He stood up. Jeff always stands for speeches, regardless of context or audience readiness, tapped his glass with a knife, and beamed at the table with the expression of a man who knows exactly how annoying he's being and has made his peace with it in advance. "So," he said, "some of you know I've been trying to get Joel out of his flat for approximately 3 years. And some of you know that Joel requires roughly that amount of time to agree to anything social. So I thought, radical idea, what if I made the evening slightly more interesting?" He gestured. Not quite pointing at Ren, but close enough that every person at the table understood precisely who the gesture was about. "Ren is my tenant's cousin. Lovely woman. Recently moved to the area. Seemed like a sensible fit." He delivered it with the cheerful confidence of someone who believes good intentions neutralize bad execution. They don't. But Jeff has never let that slow him down. A ripple of amusement moved around the table. Not cruel, just the laughter of people who are in on something and find the awkwardness of it pleasantly entertaining. Then Patrick spoke. Patrick worked in finance. He had the kind of confidence that develops in men who have spent their careers in rooms where confidence is mistaken for competence. He said, in the lightened voice people use when they want something to land but want to be able to deny it later, "Bit of a setup, then." Bold move, Jeff. A pause perfectly timed. She drew the short straw. He said it at the air between himself and the wall, not at Ren directly, never directly, because that would require ownership, and he was already scanning the table for the approval he'd assumed he'd get before he finished the sentence. He got some of it. The table laughed, nervous some of it, genuine some of it, reflexive most of it. The laugh of people who follow the lead of whoever seems most sure of themselves. Beside me, I was aware of Ren doing something very specific and very controlled, not reacting. Her expression didn't shift. But her hand, which had been resting lightly on the stem of her wine glass, moved exactly 2 inches to the left along the tablecloth and stopped. The way something stops when it's deciding not to do the other thing. She wasn't going to say anything. She'd already read the room completely in that first doorway moment, and she understood exactly what kind of room it was. She had made the calculation that speaking would cost her more than silence, and she was going to ride it out with the particular dignity of a woman who has ridden out considerably worse. I set my fork down. I looked at Patrick. He was still smiling at the table. "I think you've got it backwards," I said. The table went a degree quieter. Patrick looked at me. She came into a room where nobody thought to tell her what she was walking into. She sat down next to a man who didn't introduce himself. She's been holding the weight of everyone else's bad manners for 20 minutes without flinching or making it anyone's problem. That's not a short straw. That's someone with considerably more grace than the rest of this table is currently demonstrating. I picked my fork back up. The silence lasted about 4 seconds. Then Patrick did a short laugh. The compressed, recalculating laugh of a man who can't decide whether he's been complimented or corrected and so chooses to treat it as neither. Someone at the far end of the table refilled their glass. Jeff was watching me with an expression I couldn't entirely decode, somewhere between surprised and something warmer than that. And Ren. She didn't look at me immediately. She looked at her plate. But something in the line of her jaw changed, released by one precise degree the way a muscle lets go when it's been clenched too long and finally finds it's allowed. Her hand moved back to the wine glass. She took one slow breath through her nose. Then she looked at me. Just briefly. Just for a moment. Gray-brown eyes, steady and unhurried, with something in them I couldn't name yet but felt as a physical thing. A shift in the temperature of the air between us. Not gratitude. Ren is not a woman who performs gratitude at being defended, as though it were a transaction. It was something more like recognition. The look of someone who has found something in a room they'd already written off. Something spread through my chest. Slow and even, the way warmth spreads. Not electric, not the dramatic rush the stories describe, but something quieter and more structural. Like a room reaching the right temperature after you've been cold so long you'd stopped expecting it to change. I noted it. I filed it carefully. I did not, in that moment, do anything remotely useful with it. It turned out she lived in flat 3B. I discovered this 40 minutes after the dinner ended, when we reached for our coats at the same moment, not arranged, just coincidence, and happened to leave at the same time and happened to be heading in the same direction, and I mentioned Marsden Road and she said, "Oh," in a way that had several things inside it that I didn't yet know how to unpack. "What number?" she asked. 41. She stopped walking for exactly 1 second. "I'm 41, she said. 3B. 3A, I said. We looked at each other on the pavement outside the restaurant. The universe had arranged something architectural and slightly impertinent, and we both understood it at the same moment. "You're the one with the terrible record collection," she said. "I don't know what you've heard." "I've heard it. Through the wall. It is objectively terrible. It's eclectic. You have 3 Fleetwood Mac albums and what sounds strongly like someone explaining jazz to a person who has made clear they don't want the explanation. That's Miles Davis. I know what Miles Davis sounds like. That is someone's interpretation of the concept of Miles Davis. That is not the man himself. I had nothing for that. She'd already started walking, and I fell into step beside her, and we made the 11-minute walk home in the specific rhythm of 2 people who have just discovered they are going to have to figure out how to exist near each other. At the front door she said goodnight. She didn't look back. I went upstairs and stood in my kitchen without doing anything in particular. By the following Saturday I had learned more about Ren than I had strictly planned to. She had a daughter. 6 years old. Dark hair and enormous eyes and an absolute single-minded devotion to dinosaurs that had the quality of a professional commitment rather than a childhood phase. B introduced herself by knocking on my door at 9:15 Saturday morning and announcing that something inside my wall was making a noise and she needed to know if it was an animal and if so what kind. Ren appeared in the doorway of 3B 90 seconds later, still in a gray t-shirt and socks, holding a mug with both hands, with the expression of a woman who has been awake since 6:30 and is managing her disappointment about the world with admirable restraint. "I'm so sorry," she said. "B. Come here." "He might have an animal," B said, with the confidence of someone whose argument she considers airtight. "It's a pipe," I said. "Hot water riser from the second floor. It knocks when the boiler fires." B processed this with the gravity of a small scientist assessing new data. "Does it hurt the pipe?" "No." "Okay." She turned to her mother. "It doesn't hurt the pipe." "Great," said Ren. She looked at me over the top of her mug with an expression I was already beginning to learn, the one she wore when something had been funnier than she intended to acknowledge. "Thank you for the structural consultation. Pipes are adjacent to my work," I said. "Adjacent," she said like she was filing it somewhere. She took me inside. I went back to my coffee. I moved the mug from the counter to the table for no reason I could account for. Proximity did the rest. She worked from home 4 days a week. Medical transcription, headphones on, her kitchen window cracked open when she was on a call so the audio didn't echo. She made coffee at 7:15 and again at 11 with the regularity of someone whose mornings are structured around it. She opened her front door for packages and said good morning in the hall with the tone of someone who means it and isn't looking for an extended conversation, which I respected immediately. I started leaving the landing light on at night. Not a decision exactly, just something I noticed I was doing. She came home late on Thursdays. B was with her father on Thursdays, she'd mentioned once, without weight, just as a fact. The stairwell bulb had been out for 6 weeks. I left my landing light on and it threw enough light to see the stairs clearly. She noticed after 11 days. She said nothing for another week. Then one morning there was a jar of good ground coffee outside my door with a post-it that said, in neat precise handwriting, "For the light." 3 words. I read them 4 times. I made a cup. I thought about it longer than was rational. The first near confession happened on a rainy Wednesday in October. Her Wi-Fi had gone down. She needed to finish a transcription. She knocked and asked carefully if she could use mine, and I said she could in the voice I use when I'm trying to make something seem smaller than it is. She sat across my kitchen table with her headphones around her neck and her laptop open and typed steadily for 40 minutes while I sat opposite with a book I was not reading. Every few minutes she touched the 3rd button of her collar. Every few minutes I turned a page. At some point she looked up. "Can I ask you something?" "Yes," I said and set the book down. "Why did you say what you said at the dinner?" "To Patrick." Rain against the window. The boiler ticking in the wall. I looked at the kitchen table, an old oak table I'd carried through 3 different flats, that had a ring near one corner from a mug left there the night my last relationship ended, a small gouge from a house move. A table with a history. I found it grounding usually. "Because he was wrong," I said. "People are wrong all the time," she said. "You don't seem like someone who makes a habit of correcting them publicly." "I'm not." "So what was different?" I considered the question. I considered giving her a partial answer, the safe version. I gave her most of the true one instead. "You walked into that room and it had already decided something about you," I said. "Before you'd said a word. Before anyone had asked you a single question. And what it had decided was wrong." She was quiet for a moment. "That's a careful answer," she said. "It's the true one." "It's a true one," she said. "That's different." She was looking at me with those gray-brown eyes, steady and unhurried, and there was something in her expression that was asking a question she hadn't put into words yet. I opened my mouth. Then my phone rang, the building manager finally calling about the stairwell bulb, and the moment folded itself flat and slid somewhere I couldn't immediately locate. "Sorry," I said. "Don't be," she said. But she put her headphones back on. And when she left an hour later she paused in my hallway and touched my arm, briefly, lightly, 2 fingers on the inside of my forearm, and said good night. The touch lasted about 2 seconds. I was aware of it for considerably longer. The second near confession happened at the Natural History Museum. B had decided that the new ankylosaur exhibit would be better with more people and had knocked on my door to formally request my attendance. Ren appeared behind her with the expression of a woman who has decided that apologizing for her child would be counterproductive. You genuinely don't have to, she said. I know, I said. I got my jacket. We led. We followed. I was handed a dinosaur fact book and instructed to read from it at a pace she could interrupt, which she did every 2 sentences and which she did correctly. She caught a factual imprecision about the habitat range of the Spinosaurus and presented her correction with the quiet confidence of someone who expects accuracy and is disappointed when they don't find it. I conceded the point. She accepted with the grace of someone accustomed to being right. We walked through the long fossil gallery, and at some point I was aware that Ren's shoulder was close to mine. Not touching, just close. Close enough that I was conscious of the warmth of another person's body in the specific way you are when you've been without it long enough that proximity registers as new information. We stopped in front of the Diplodocus cast, enormous, curved, prehistoric and patient overhead, and B ran ahead to read a panel, and Ren tilted her head back and looked up at the bones. She's the best thing I ever did, she said quietly. Not performing it. Just saying a true thing into the air between us. She is, I said. She has his eyes. A beat. I used to think that would be harder than it is. Is it hard? She brought her gaze down from the skeleton. She looked at me for a moment that was slightly too long to be incidental. Less than it used to be, she said. That wasn't the sentence she'd started. I could feel the original version of it, the one that had been redirected mid-course. There was something unfinished in the air between us and we both knew it. Ren, I started. Mom. Joel. Come and read this. B, 20 feet ahead, pointing at a panel about tail club mechanics with the urgency of someone who considers this genuinely time-sensitive. We went. We read it. B explained what the panel had underemphasized. On the tube home she fell asleep with her head against her mother's arm. Ren looked out the dark window. I looked at both of them and kept my hands in my lap, and didn't do the thing I was thinking about doing for the entire 22 minutes home. It was the longest tube ride I've been on in years. Hold on a second, I need to know something. Where in the world are you listening to this right now? Drop it in the comments. People have been leaving locations from places I've never even thought about, and it means more than I can explain. Subscribe if you haven't yet. There's another story coming next week and you won't want to miss it. Okay, I'm back. The third near confession happened on a Thursday night at my door at 11 o'clock, which was the last time I would have predicted it and probably the only time it could have happened. She knocked. I opened it and she was in the gray t-shirt from that first Saturday morning, hair loose, reading glasses pushed up on her head, holding a mug the way you hold something when you need your hands to be doing something other than what they want to do. I keep starting to tell you something, she said, and then not telling you. I know, I said. You've noticed. Yes. She looked at her mug. She looked at me. The landing light was on behind me, still mine, still every night. I moved here, she said, because I needed somewhere without history. Somewhere that was only forward. I was very committed to that. Very specifically committed to not, she paused, searching for it, complicating things. Right, I said. And you are, she said, extraordinarily inconvenient, Joel. Something happened in the center of my chest. I refused to name it. I shifted my weight slightly. I live 11 feet away, I said. Statistically, this was always going to be a problem. It is a considerable problem, she said. Yes. The hallway was quiet. The boiler knocked once somewhere in the wall. She was looking at me with everything in her eyes and I could feel the shape of what she wasn't saying, like a change in air pressure against my skin. What were you going to tell me? I said. The thing you keep starting. She held my gaze for a long time. Not tonight, she said finally. Very quietly. I think not tonight. She went back to 3B. She closed the door softly. I stood in my doorway for a full minute after she'd gone. Not going anywhere. Just standing there in the landing light, in the specific discomfort of a man who knows exactly what he wants and has not yet been given permission to want it. Then I went inside and sat in the dark for a while. I almost never sit in the dark. The fact that I did it told me something I hadn't quite articulated yet, or maybe I had articulated it. Maybe I'd known it for weeks. Maybe I'd known it since a coffee jar and 3 words on a post-it note and the particular warmth of someone thinking of you before you'd asked. 3 days later I ran into her on the staircase. I was coming home from a site visit in bad weather, jacket still damp, the afternoon having been professionally and meteorologically unkind in equal measure. She was coming up behind me with a bag of groceries and Bia's backpack over one shoulder. We met on the second-floor landing in the specific awkwardness of two people who have said something enormous without saying it and now must continue to occupy the same building. "Hi," she said. "Hi," I said. We stood there 1 second too long. Then Bea appeared from below the landing, still on the stairs, and announced, "Joel, did you know a group of flamingos is called a flamboyance?" I did not know that. Neither did my teacher. I told her today. How did she take it? She said she'd look it up. Bea reached the landing, took her backpack from her mother's shoulder, slung it over her own with total physical confidence. "Mum's making soup. You should have some." I looked at Ren. Ren looked at me. "You don't have to," she said, in the exact same tone she'd used at the museum. "I know," I said, in the exact same tone I'd used then. Bea was already heading up the stairs. I had soup. Good soup, a thick winter vegetable thing with bread from the bakery 2 streets over, and the kitchen warm and small in November dark outside. Bea ate quickly and disappeared into her room with a book. Ren and I sat across from each other at her kitchen table, and the soup got slightly cold while neither of us said the thing that was sitting in the room with us. "I'm sorry about the other night," she said. "For knocking and then. Don't apologize for that. I knocked at 11 o'clock. "You knocked," I answered. "That's allowed." I looked at her steadily. "Ren, you can knock." She wrapped her hands around her bowl, looked into it, turned something over privately. "When I moved here," she said slowly, "I promised myself I wouldn't need anyone for a while. That I'd get steady first. By myself." Pause. "I've been steady for some time now. I just hadn't noticed until recently that steady and alone aren't actually the same category." "They're not," I said. She looked up. And the look we exchanged across that kitchen table was the kind that contains both the question and the answer, unspoken, the whole thing understood by both people simultaneously. I moved my spoon to the other side of the bowl for no reason. She looked at the spoon. She looked at me. The almost smile appeared, the careful one, the preliminary to the real one. "You do that," she said. "Do what?" "Move things. When you're about to say something and then don't." "I'm a quiet person." "You are. And yet." She tilted her head slightly. "I transcribe for a living. I notice what people do in the gap between what they're thinking and what they say." The kitchen was warm. Bea made a small satisfied sound from the other room. She'd found the page she wanted. Outside the window, November was pressing cold against the glass. "Ren," I said. "I know," she said, quietly. "I know, Joel. Not yet." We weren't there yet. But for the first time we were both looking at the same thing and calling it the same name, privately, in the same moment. I stayed another hour. When I left she walked me to her door and we stood in the frame of it, just 4 inches of cold air between us, and she looked up at me for a moment that lasted the exact right amount of time. Then she said good night. I said good night. I went back to 3A and sat with the particular feeling of a man who is waiting for something he is no longer pretending he doesn't want. It was a Sunday in late November. An ordinary Sunday. No occasion, no special circumstance, nothing to mark it as significant from the outside. I was on my back on the bathroom floor with a wrench and a corroded fitting that had, over the preceding hour, become personal. 9 months overdue. The floor was cold. My dignity had taken several hits. She knocked at 2:30. "It's open," I called. She came through the hall and stood in the bathroom doorway looking down at me with the particular quality she had on Sundays, looser somehow, less assembled, as though the parts of herself she kept carefully organized during the week had been allowed to settle into their natural positions. She was in an old blue shirt, the sleeves pushed up, feet bare. Hair loose. The pale winter light through the frosted window was soft and entirely unhurried. "Is it bad?" she asked. "The fitting is corroded," I said. "Worse than it looks?" "Considerably." She leaned against the doorframe, crossed her arms loosely, looked at me on the floor with an expression that was not quite a smile but was adjacent to one. "Bea asked me something this morning," she said. I stopped turning the wrench. "She asked if you were going to be our family." The Sunday light held very still. She said it the way she says things, like it's a fact she's already confirmed and just needs me to verify. She said you leave the landing light on so we can see when we come home at night. She said you know what tea I drink and you came to the museum even though you don't care about dinosaurs. Ankylosaurs are somewhat interesting, I said. Her mouth did the thing, the controlled almost smile that becomes the real one. They are slightly interesting, she allowed. Then, quieter, she said those are the things her book about families says families do. The tap dripped once into the basin below. The boiler held its breath. She's not wrong, I said. No, Ren said. She isn't. I set the wrench down. I sat up. I stood, which was less graceful than I'd have preferred given the circumstances, and the bathroom was small, and standing I was close to her. Close enough to see the slight rise and fall of her breathing, the careful evenness she was maintaining. I've been trying to tell you something, she said. Her voice was level. The kind of level that takes effort. For weeks. I keep getting to the edge of it and then, not. And I think I've been waiting for the right moment, but I'm starting to understand that I've actually just been afraid, which is different, and I'm tired of being afraid of something that already feels. She stopped. It already feels real, Joel. It's been real for a while. I just haven't said it. The light didn't move. The room didn't move. Can I started. Yes, she said. Immediately. Before I'd finished the sentence. Of course she did. She'd always been slightly ahead of me. I raised my hand and touched her face, the line of her jaw, my thumb at her cheekbone, slow and asking. I felt her breath catch. She turned her face into my hand, leaning into it, and I felt the exact moment she stopped holding anything back. That single degree of release, the one I'd been watching for without knowing I was watching. I kissed her. Softly. Carefully. A first kiss that knows what it is, unhurried and tender and entirely present, my lips against hers asking, "Is this right? Is this the thing? Is this what you meant?" And she answered it. She kissed me back with both hands coming up slowly to hold my face, the way you hold something fragile and irreplaceable, and the kiss was gentle and warm and full of everything that had been accumulated quietly over weeks of landing lights and coffee jars and soup on a cold evening. We stayed in it. Neither of us was in a hurry. There was a softness to the first kiss that felt like an acknowledgement of all of it, the slow approach, the careful weeks, the doorways and the almost said things. We kissed like people who had been patient for a long time and had finally arrived somewhere worth arriving. When we pulled back we were still close. Her eyes opened slowly. She looked at me with those gray-brown eyes and something in them was open in a way I hadn't seen before. A room unlocked that I hadn't known was locked. "Okay," she said softly. Half to herself. Then I kissed her again. This one was different. Less question, more answer. She exhaled against my mouth and her hands moved from my jaw into my hair and what had been gentle became warmer and more certain. The kiss of two people who have stopped deliberating and made a decision. She kissed me back with a fullness that she'd been keeping carefully contained, and I felt the last 4 years of practiced distance dissolve, room by room, like a house being lit from the inside. I pulled her closer. She came without hesitation, her arms going around my shoulders, and we were pressed against the bathroom door frame kissing with the full intensity of people who have been spectacularly patient and have decided they are done being patient. And it was warm and real and better than anything I'd imagined on the evenings when I'd sat in the dark and refused to imagine it. When we finally broke apart, both of us were breathing unevenly. Her forehead dropped to mine. We stood like that, close, catching our breath, both slightly surprised by ourselves. "You are covered in pipe residue," she said. "I'm aware. It's in your hair." "Also aware." She laughed. And then the plastic basin under the sink tipped. I'd caught it with my foot without noticing, and it made a spectacular amount of noise for its size and a genuinely embarrassing amount of collected leak water spread across the tile floor and saturated both of my socks completely. She laughed properly then. Fully, helplessly, both hands over her mouth and then giving up on that, bent slightly at the waist, and I stood there in my soaking wet socks looking at her and felt something I hadn't felt in so long I'd half forgotten it was possible. The specific, warm, slightly ridiculous feeling of being exactly where you're supposed to be at exactly the wrong moment. "Worst surveyor," she said, still laughing. "Not my finest afternoon," I agreed. She kissed me again, quick, warm, still smiling, and it tasted like laughter, which is, for the record, the best thing a kiss can taste like. If that just hit you the way it hits me every time I tell it, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. People have been finding these stories from every corner of the world and I want to know your corner. Subscribe if you haven't. A new story lands every week. Now, let me finish this one. We did not rush anything after that. We were both, by nature and by history, people who understood the cost of rushing. And there was something right about letting it come at the pace it wanted to come, about being people who had already proven to each other that we could be patient, that we paid attention, that we didn't require the big gesture when the small ones were already doing all the necessary work. What happened instead was that the Sundays became ours. Bea was with her father on Sundays. The flat was quiet in the specific way it got when she wasn't in it. Ren started appearing at mine at around 2 in the afternoon. Not arranged, just expected, the way things become expected when they've found their natural rhythm. She'd come with coffee or I'd have it made already. We'd sit at opposite ends of the sofa with the window cracked and the November air moving through, and we'd read or she'd work and I'd work, and at some point we'd stop working and talk. The long, unhurried kind of talking that isn't trying to get anywhere, just two people slowly unwrapping themselves in the afternoon light. She told me about BA's father. Not with anger, she'd already done whatever work needed doing with the anger, somewhere she didn't discuss, but with the clear-eyed precision of someone who has processed a thing fully and arrived at the other side of it. He hadn't been cruel. He'd been absent in the way certain men are absent, present in the room, missing in every way that cost something. She'd stayed longer than she should have because leaving with a small child felt like the larger disruption, and then she'd left because staying had become the larger one. She said it plainly without asking for anything from the telling. "I'm glad you left," I said. She looked at me. "That's an interesting thing to say." "It's the true one," I said. And I watched her mouth curve when she recognized her own phrasing, and then she crossed the sofa and kissed me, not softly this time. Both hands in my hair, certain and warm, the kiss of a woman who has finished deliberating. I pulled her close and kissed her back with everything I'd been keeping carefully managed for months, and the afternoon went amber around us and neither of us was careful anymore. When she finally sat back, her hair had come loose entirely. "Okay," she said. That word she kept using for things that were considerably larger than okay. "Okay," I said. The harder conversations came later, the way they always do. One evening in December, cold, dark, early, the kitchen table between us, 2 cups of tea going cold, she asked if I was certain. Not about her. About all 3 of them. "B doesn't do temporary," she said. "Not as a threat. As information offered carefully. She's already put you in the category of people she would be sad about. If this changes, if we try and it," she stopped. "It has to be real. For me it can be work in progress, I can hold uncertainty, I've done that. But for her it has to be real." I looked at her across the table. I thought about 11 weeks of a landing light nobody had asked me to turn on. I thought about a dinosaur fact book read at interruption pace in a long museum gallery. I thought about a bathroom floor and wet socks and the specific warmth of being laughed at by someone who is also kissing you. "I'm certain," I said. 2 words. She held my gaze for a long moment. Then she nodded, the single small nod she does when something has been decided. "Okay," she said. That was the yes. Announced in an ordinary kitchen on an ordinary December evening with the tea gone cold and no audience. I reached across the table and took her hand. She turned it over and held mine back. We sat like that for a long time without speaking, the dark pressing soft against the windows, and it was the best kind of silence, full and settled and entirely chosen. 3 weeks later she arrived at my flat at 8:30 on a Saturday morning with B and a bag of pastries and no announcement, and I opened the door and stepped back to let them in without either of us remarking on the fact that this was new. It didn't feel new. It felt like something that had been coming for a long time and had finally gotten here. B settled on the floor with a book about prehistoric marine environments. I made coffee. Ren stood at my kitchen window with the early winter light across her face, both hands around her mug, looking at the street below with the particular stillness she had on mornings when things were good. I stood behind her for a moment and just looked. The line of her. The way she held a mug. The specific quality of her quiet, which was different from other people's quiet. Fuller somehow, more inhabited. "You're staring," she said without turning. "Yes," I said. Pause. "That's allowed," she said, giving me my own words in my own tone. I crossed the kitchen and stood beside her. She leaned into me automatically the way she did now, the way a plant leans toward light it has learned it can trust. I put my arm around her. We looked at the ordinary street together. A woman with a dog, a van attempting a parking space it had no business attempting, 2 pigeons and some private diplomatic crisis. We drank our coffee in the January light and said nothing for a long time. And it was the best kind of nothing. Full and warm and exactly enough. 1 year later. The Natural History Museum again. The Ocean Life exhibit, which B has assessed as almost as interesting as dinosaurs but lacking the same existential stakes. She walks ahead of us through the gallery with a pamphlet she's already memorized, correcting the information panels under her breath. Ren walks beside me. Her hand is in mine. We don't talk for a while, just walk, and it is the specific ease of people who have stopped performing ease and are simply living inside it. 18 months. A Saturday morning. B has a friend over and they have been in her room for 40 minutes and the volume has progressed through what Ren has classified as fine, and into what I've classified as potentially structural. We're pretending to read at the kitchen table. Should I start? No. That sound was. They're fine. Ren. That was. Joel. They are fine. A crash. A silence. Then laughter. They're fine, she says again with complete serenity, and she is right. They emerge 15 minutes later covered in felt-tip pen with an explanation that involves a map they've drawn of an imaginary country and a border dispute. Ren looks at me over the top of her mug with the real smile on, the one I spent 3 months collecting before I understood what I was doing. I make more coffee. This is my function. I have accepted it. 2 years. Christmas in Shropshire at Ren's mother's house. Warm, slightly overcrowded, smelling of mince pies and the particular happiness of a full house. B has taken her grandmother by the hand and is explaining the geological timeline with the patience of a very small professor who genuinely loves her subject. Her grandmother asks questions that are so good B has to stop and think before answering. Ren is in the kitchen doorway. Wine in one hand. The good smile on, the real one, the unguarded one. She doesn't know I'm watching. I watch her for about 20 seconds. Then I cross the room and stand beside her and she leans into me without turning her head, automatically, the way she does now, without thinking about it, without calculating whether it's right. I put my arm around her. Her hand finds mine at her waist. We watch B explain the Cretaceous period to someone who is delighted, genuinely and completely, to be taught. She's something, I say. She really is, Ren says. 2 years, 3 months. Thursday evening. BA's night with her father. The flat very quiet. We are on the sofa, the television off, and I've had the thing in my jacket pocket for 2 weeks. Carried it every day. Talked myself in and out of various timings, all of them feeling either too staged or not staged enough. Ren is reading. Or doing the thing she does that looks like reading and is actually thinking about something she hasn't told me yet. She looks up. You've been thinking very loudly, she says, for approximately a fortnight. I'm a quiet person. You are. And yet. I get up. I get my jacket from the chair. I come back to the sofa. I set the small box on the cushion between us. She looks at it. She looks at me. Ren, I say. I left the light on. A beat. She knows exactly what that means. 11 weeks of a landing light nobody asked me to leave on. The first small thing I did for her before I understood that I was doing it for her. Her hand goes to her mouth. Just for a second. Then she lowers it. You absolute, she starts. And then she's laughing and her eyes are bright and she leans forward and opens the box and looks at the ring and looks at me. Yes, she says. Before I've asked. In the same tone she used in a bathroom doorway on a Sunday afternoon, with the same clarity and the same complete absence of hesitation. Of course she did. She was always slightly ahead of me. I put the ring on her finger. She pulled me in and kissed me, warm and certain and a little fierce, both hands on my face, the way she'd kissed me that first afternoon in the bathroom when everything had finally arrived. I kissed her back the same way and we stayed in it for a long time, and when we eventually came apart she looked at her hand and then at me and the good smile was on and all the rest of it too. You know B is going to tell everyone, she said. I know. She's going to start with the geological timeline and work her way forward to us. Obviously. She'll probably make a chart. I look forward to it, I said. She laughed. I kissed her again, softer this time just because I could, just because she was there and had said yes and the landing light was on outside and there was nowhere else I was supposed to be. She stayed where she was, tucked against me, her head on my shoulder, and we sat in the quiet flat on an ordinary Thursday night for a long time with the world going on perfectly well without us. The way we tell it now, B is usually the one who brings it up, at dinner tables, to her friends, to teachers who have asked a question they didn't realize was going to take this long to answer. They met because someone used mum as a joke, she says, with the full prosecutorial confidence of someone who has rehearsed this. At a birthday dinner. And he stood up for her before he even knew her name. That's not quite. Ren starts. Before she'd said a single word, B continues. And he didn't make a speech about it. He just said one thing and went back to eating. Ren looks at me across the table. You were in wet socks, she says. Just for me. A callback. A small private thing. I was in wet socks, I say. You still said yes. She shakes her head. The good smile. The real one. Worst surveyor, she says. Best light, I say. If you made it to the end, thank you. Genuinely. Drop a comment and tell me where in the world you're watching from. I read every single one and every location surprises me. If this story found you at the right time, subscribe. A new one arrives every day. I'll see you in the next one.